lived in the 1920s, and if you'd have told someone diesel was the way forward for the railways, then many would have said otherwise. It was the golden age of steam, and streamlining was the key. But in less than 30 years, British Rail had no choice but to concede that steam was no longer king of the railway and would need to look at alternative traction to keep the people moving. The thing is, unlike steam engines, mass production of diesels on a large scale simply wasn't there yet. There was no clear market brand or leader and no clear view of what a typical diesel would be. British Rail liked uniformity, but in a step away from form, they commissioned several manufacturers to build their own version of a diesel. British Rail would take the design and make it the model for all diesels everywhere. Among the throng of designers, there was one company called Brush Traction. They had experience building diesels before, having built locomotives for overseas, and knew that the traction was the way of the future. The company couldn't wait to break in their new testing and production facility on the British order and wanted to amalgamate the best of the overseas models with British design. Like the steam engines, parts for the new engines were built in different factories before each part was sent to the Loughborough facility to be put together. Known as the Brush Type 2, the engine was a true beast, being one of the heavier diesels on the network. It sat on twin 3-axle bogies, 2 of which were powered by a Merley's JBS 12T or a 12-cylinder 1250 brake horsepower engine. But the engines were unsuccessful during testing and initial use, so the engines were swapped to an English Electric 12SVT engine, a higher powered engine which was so successful that the entire fleet was re-engined. 20 of these were built, with the first of them hitting the metal in September of 1957. Its brothers soon joined it, and they were set to work undertaking a variety of duties. They were easily recognisable and earned the name of skinheads or gurglers. They were put through their paces as a mixed traffic engine and were just as adept at pulling goods as it was pulling the faster expresses, even though they were limited to 80 miles an hour. Long or short distance, this engine just got on with the job. They worked mostly in the eastern region, such as East Anglia, and were quite famous around there. Brush was pleased with their work and was expecting a flood of orders from British Rails. But the orders at first wouldn't come. British Rail were not ignorant to the diesel's success, far from it, but their cost and weight made them undesirable against the lighter and cheaper Bobos. But the following year, Brush got the shock when 40 locomotive orders landed on their doorstep. While the Bobos were performing, in the background, the Type 2s were the silent workhorses. They were performing amazingly well and were becoming one of the more reliable diesels on the fleet. But Brush wanted to make improvements to the design. Internally, the speed control system was altered so it ran on air pressure, and the engines were fine-tuned with new turbochargers, which made the engine stronger and more powerful. But the main design change was to the front cab. Instead of using the old head code system, 20 locomotives of the new design included a new head box code. The head box could easily be changed within the cab without the driver having to clamber out. The new locomotives were put to work as the flag bearers for the new diesels, especially in the north. Their work made them quickly the dominant diesel locomotives and were even replacing other diesels such as the Class 25s. The engines were quickly turning heads, and orders from British Rail were starting to flood in. Improvements were made yet again to the 31/4 models. One distinct advantage that a steam engine had over diesel was the ability to heat its own coaches using steam from the boiler, and it was pretty simple. A pipe was connected directly from the engine to the coaches, and the steam would flow through and into radiators. The steam heat can be controlled in the carriage itself using a valve, especially useful in compartments. But the diesel engines couldn't afford that luxury, and heating carriages was a real problem. It wasn't just for passenger convenience. In the cold winter months, it was common to see carriages simply freeze up with no heat running through them. The problem was fixed by converting some of the diesels to have electric train heating. Instead of relying on steam, the apparatus would provide both electrical power and heat through electric elements in the carriage. The conversion meant that the carriages would also have to be converted, but this was a godsend when steam was abolished on the line. Soon everything from lighting to air conditioning was working through this new apparatus. But it all changed in 1962. The old engines were experiencing problems, especially those that had had the power upgrades. Cracks were forming in the engine blocks. It was so serious that 51 new engines were ordered and the engines were replaced at considerable cost. But the diesels were worth it. Their work ethic was almost unmatched, and the new, now Class 31s, were proving perfect for every type of railway use and job. In the late 1980s, the Class 31s were slowly being displaced from passenger duties in place of newer engines. HSTs and Sprinters would relegate the Class 31s to freight sector, but in the 1990s, privatisation and the new Class 66s would start the end of the Class 31. Many were scrapped, but about 30 or so ended up on heritage railways. And interestingly, the first and the last built are actually preserved. The first built resides at the National Railway Museum, and the last built is cared for at the Strathley Railway. Deep in the engine shed at MZ 6D5600. It was built in 1960. 31179, as it is reclassed in the 70s, was a mixed traffic engine and was one of the 44 fitted with the electric train heater at Doncaster Works. 31179 was renumbered yet again to 31435 and worked across country between Grimsby and Liverpool. In 1995, after years of service, the engine was condemned for withdrawal, but it survived untouched and unmoved for 4 years until it was privately sold. It was sent to the East Lancs Railway and was repainted back to its original BR livery, and its number D5600 was reinstated. It moved to MZ in 2007 and is now undergoing an extensive overhaul. But MZ, for a steam railway, has a second Class 31 hidden in the wings. 31119 is a year older than its brother. It moved to MZ in 2006, where it has remained in long-term storage. And at the time of writing, yes, MZ is playing host to a third. 31452 is playing guest at the railway in a rather unusual BR intercity livery. It has been repainted from its BR green for a special occasion and is truly unique. The engine will be on the metals for the up-and-coming Beer Fest and Diesel Festival at the end of the month. In all, 263 Class 31s were created, which is quite an achievement for a design that was initially rejected. The only drawback to these beasts were their size and weight. For their flaws, they were an incredible unit and one of the true kings of the diesel movement.